So, training with resistance bands has a ton of unique advantages. They're really portable, they're really light, so you can train with them anywhere. They can be perfect for rehabilitation, and they're very difficult to injure yourself with. You certainly can't drop them on your foot. And they can be used for all kinds of alternative strategies, whether it's accommodating resistance, where you change the amount of resistance throughout a range of motion, or whether it's joint distractions, where you open up a joint so that you can improve mobility and reduce pain and other difficulties. However, the number one benefit of using resistance bands, as far as I'm concerned, is that it allows you to more closely mimic a range of different functional movements. It lets you train more in line with the principle of specificity, and it lets you alter the angle and plane of resistance. This is a huge deal. I think it's something that's massively overlooked in a lot of people's training and in the fitness industry at large, and so I'm going to explain why it's such a big deal right now. So what do I mean when I talk about angle of resistance? Well, essentially the angle of resistance is the direction from which the resistance is coming from. So the simplest way to think about this is that when you're lifting weights, usually the angle of resistance is vertical, it's straight down, and that's of course because it's gravity that's providing that resistance. When you lift any kind of weight, you're pulling it off the ground, and you can manipulate this a little bit by lying underneath the weight or by perhaps attaching it to a cable or something, but ultimately gravity is what's providing that resistance. It's always going to be straight down. With a resistance band or by attaching a cable, you can alter that angle and thereby place the resistance behind you, to the side of you, you can put it diagonally above you, etc, etc. This allows you to train not only in the sagittal plane but also in the frontal plane and the transverse plane, and this is absolutely huge. Like I say, it allows you to adhere far more closely to the principle of specificity. So if you're interested in functional training, it's probably because you want to get better either at the things you do in your day-to-day life or in a specific sport. And when it comes to a specific sport, then you're going to be doing things like throwing a ball, kicking a ball, you might be wrestling somebody. In all these scenarios, you're actually exerting strength forwards, not up. It's all in the horizontal plane, so having resistance that's coming from down below is not particularly useful. And in regular life, you don't only exert strength by picking things up. You might be pushing furniture, you might be dragging something, you might be wrestling with a friend. Sure, you sometimes pick up your kid, but even if you do that, you're probably going to walk with them. The best way to train someone to swing a bat wouldn't be to give them a heavier bat, it would be to provide resistance behind the bat so that they're swinging through that resistance, and at the same time they're still using the exact same trajectory and they're not pulling up and down. Even something like a medicine ball is a fantastic tool for so many things, but if you're just interested in being able to throw further, then that weight is still, the added weight is still coming downwards, and so you're not really practicing the right kind of thing. And for all these reasons, being able to manipulate the angle of resistance with bands, with cables, is absolutely essential. Another big advantage when it comes to training specificity and trying to mimic a specific movement is the option to add different attachments to the resistance bands. In this case, I've got a grip that's supposed to be used for pull-ups that strengthens your grip. So this is obviously much more difficult to hold on to than something that is a handle that wraps around your hand, and therefore I'm training my grip at the same time as training my core and my lats or my pecs, whatever I'm working. So if I wanted to become better at tug of war, because for some reason I keep going on about that as an example, then pulling this is closer to pulling a rope, and of course I could just add a rope to it and literally be practicing tug of war. Should I do it? Slow motion. So here I'm going to be doing a single arm band press, and what this essentially mimics is something like a bench press. It's a pec and shoulder and tricep exercise where you're pushing forwards against resistance. The difference is that when you perform a bench press, you're lying flat on your back. And what this essentially does is it isolates the chest. It removes the role of the core in stabilizing your body. This is a really good thing if you're interested in building just massive pecs, loads of strength in the pecs, and you want to get a really big bench press. However, it isn't that useful in terms of real world transfer. And of course the reason for this is that whether you're helping a friend move house and pushing furniture, whether you're wrestling somebody and trying to push them over, or trying to push down a tree, I don't know why, you don't have the luxury of lying flat on your back and removing the role of the core. In other words, if you're not training your core at the same time as your chest, then you're effectively building your chest and not being able to use it. And JC Santana showed me some research that was conducted at his Institute of Human Performance, where they looked at the muscle activation of the band press versus the chest press or bench press. And of course they're completely different. Whereas one showed massive activation in the pecs and shoulders and triceps, the other one showed lesser activation there, but also much more activation in the core, even some in the legs. And JC Santana explained this to me as trying to fire a cannon from a canoe. In other words, if you build the biggest pecs in the world, but you don't have the base and the core to support them, then essentially they're useless to you. So imagine you have a 150 kilogram bench press, you go to push someone over, but all that's going to happen is your back's going to bend backwards. Nobody can support 150 kilograms worth of force in that direction, or very few people can. So there's not a ton of practical benefit to building that kind of strength. Of course there are in other senses, and I'm not saying it's useless, I love the bench press, but I'm saying that you should also be doing this if you want to be able to transfer as much of that strength that you've developed to a real world setting. Of course, another advantage of this version, the single arm band press, is that you also have that rotational element, because not only do you have to keep your core straight and upright, you're not only trying to prevent it from extending, but at the same time you're also trying to prevent it from twisting the other way as you push. You need to keep your core rigid or even push through. So you can also do a single band press with rotation, which is even better. Now you could say, couldn't I develop my shoulder mobility and my core stability independently of the bench press? Could I do a bench press and then do some one-armed push-ups and then maybe do some anti-extension movements? And sure, that would work to an extent, but when you train like this, you're using all those things together. You're not only training the right movement patterns, but you might even be training the fascia, because as we know, the fascia is responsible for force transmission between distant muscle groups that often are worked in unison. Being able to train in the transverse plane with bands and cables far more easily is another one of the absolutely huge assets that this type of training has, because we do so much in the transverse plane, especially in sports, this being the rotational plane, anything that involves twisting, whether you're throwing a baseball or any other kind of ball, whether you're swinging a bat, whether you're throwing a punch, you can exert so much power this way. This taps into the serape effect, which combines some of the biggest muscles that go across either side of your body, your rhomboids, your obliques, and allows you to twist and throw at the same time, thereby really getting your weight and power behind a movement. It's why a baseball pitcher is able to throw balls at 100 miles an hour. It seems insane that our body can generate that kind of power, but we need to be moving in this way to do it. And using bands, whether it's a wood chopper movement or whether it's pulling it down from overhead, is a fantastic way to actually train this and to learn to exert that kind of power from your body. And the obvious movement that a cable or band punch out mimics is the punch, and there you can once again add resistance to a punching movement, which is so much better than punching holding weights, which adds resistance going downwards. The endless uses of wristbands, just wrap the band around the band and then hold on to it that way, it don't cut into your hand anymore. And now with this lighter resistance band, it's far more well suited to practicing cable punch outs, or band punch outs in this case. Pulling the bands there like that with the optional rotation once again mimics the way that we use our bodies in real life if we're doing a tug of war, pulling open a heavy door, or pulling back our hand after a punch. And training like this, pulling your arm back against resistance, can help you to snap back those punches faster, which not only is important for making the technique look crisp and preventing your arm from getting trapped or something, it also helps you to throw the other arm out faster. This is one of the cues that a lot of you guys have given me to improve my own bag work, is bring your arm back faster, and this is a fantastic tool for doing that. Exactly the same movement, added resistance. And let's not forget this one, because what does this look like? It's a choke hold, of course. It's a situation where your strength endurance can be a limiting factor that determines the outcome of many a fight. So you can practice this as an isometric hold, the kind of position again that's very difficult to mimic with weights and that has a direct real world transfer. Brilliant for building bicep strength, strength endurance, and mental toughness if you want to go for a long period of time. This one's a great one for training hip flexors, and if you want to be able to run faster by getting your legs up quicker, then this is a brilliant option. I always say if you're training and your knees aren't a bit dirty, you're probably not doing it right. This is a great gentle one for the knee. So this is the flat power band style of resistance band, which doesn't have the option of adding all kinds of accessories to the end, which I do think is useful, but at the same time it does allow you to loop it over yourself and it can reduce the friction on your arm, etc. So has its uses as well. I recommend picking up both essentially. One thing this is really good for is training in the frontal plane. That means moving side to side. This is something that, again, we just don't do because of the tools we have largely, I think. One great example of training in the frontal plane with a flat resistance band is to put it over either leg and then to move sideways. It's called a lateral band walk because you're using a band and you're walking laterally, and this is going to strengthen those hip abductors, moving the legs further apart, thereby helping to stabilize yourself with your sprinting, running, picking up something from the ground. Another big deal when it comes to training with bands is the ability to manipulate the strength curve. So the strength curve describes the way that the difficulty changes throughout a range of motion, and this can be affected by multiple things. The angle of resistance being one, then there's momentum. When you launch yourself through a movement, then some of that momentum is going to carry through, meaning you have to exert less force further into the movement. And then there's the resistance, the interference provided by your own antagonist muscles. This is where compressive strength comes in. If you try and perform a V-sit, you'll feel that it's hard because your own body is getting in the way of performing that movement. The lever arm and the way that changes. So if you think about performing a regular dumbbell curl, then as you curl the weight, that's the most difficult position because here the lever arm is the longest. The weight is furthest from the joint, so you're effectively working against a greater resistance. Then you have the elongation of the muscle. When the muscle is completely stretched, it's at its weakest. When it's completely compressed, it's also quite weak. When it's right in the middle, that's where you have the most strength, usually, because that's how we use it. So this is the nice thing about a regular dumbbell curl, because these two aspects of the strength curve cancel each other out. Where the weight is heaviest, you're strongest, and thereby this is a fantastic tool. This is harder to accomplish with a resistance band because the resistance band increases its resistance as you get further, as you lengthen the band. There are ways to manipulate this, but that's why I'm not saying to completely replace dumbbells and barbells and kettlebells with bands. I'm saying to complement them with bands. But where bands then come into their own is in allowing you to manipulate that strength curve and plug those gaps to strengthen yourself where you're weakest, such as in those elongated positions where you're at your end range strength. And this is really cool because it means that now you can be powerful all the way through that movement. And if you imagine throwing a punch, imagine not just launching the punch and then losing power as it travels, but being able to provide extra propulsion all the way through and extra strength. And that's what you can do with the bands. So you saw me there performing a more horizontal angled bicep curl, where now the greatest resistance is right at the top in that compressed position where the bicep is fully compressed, because now the resistance is coming from that way and it's trying to pull my bicep back open. This can be used to increase mobility, and by performing a weighted stretch you can actually increase hypertrophy, because studies show that adding resistance in a stretched position can lead to a lot of muscle growth, and I can attest to this from personal experience and from anecdotal evidence. So we can get into all kinds of weighted stretch positions using the bands, which are going to help to improve our mobility and increase hypertrophy. So don't think that this doesn't apply to you if you're a bodybuilder. By the way, the ability of bands to change their resistance like that is called linear variable resistance. This is another big reason for farmer strength and the kind of practical strength that you see in dad strength and in physical labourers. It's because they're not just picking things off the ground. If you're thinking, well, I don't have a random pole sticking out of the ground and I don't want to go to the field every time I train with bands, how can I train this at home? Then the answer is you use something called a door anchor. You simply close the door so that this is on the other side and it can't slip through. Then you can loop your band through like that, and you can do it at the top of the door, at the bottom of the door, and you can mimic pretty much anything I've done here. Obviously you do need a good amount of space in front of the door, so I admit it's not something that everyone is going to be able to do at home, but a lot of people, most people, even if you're doing it in your front door outside. So I hope you found this video useful, interesting, guys. If you did, then please leave a like and share it around. That helps me out immensely. I'd love to hear your comments down below. Let me know what your favorite exercise is using a resistance band or resistance bands. If you like training to improve not just your strength, but your strength endurance, your mobility, your resilience, even your brain function, then you'll probably enjoy my ebook and training program, Super Functional Training. There's a link to that in the description down below, and there's a discount on right now during the pandemic. I also have a print book available from all good bookshops called Functional Training and Beyond. That's an introduction to the concepts of functional training and how they apply to your everyday life as well as to sports and athletics. You can also find these clothes in the little carousel under this video if you like them. Thank you so much for all your support and just for watching this one. Please subscribe if you want to see more like it, and hit the bell button if you want to be notified of future uploads. And I'll see you next time. Thanks a ton and bye for now.